Welcome back to this SlimDevOps episode 24. Thank you very much for joining us today. We've got something a little bit different. If you're watching this on YouTube, this was originally recorded live on Twitch, twitch.tv/SlimDevOps on the 4th of November. If you'd like to join in these sessions interactively, then head over there and give us a follow. I am delighted to be joined by my good friend, Jorge Castro. Hello, how you doing?
How is everyone today? Happy hands.
Good to see you. Hello, everyone. I see we've got some of our friends and community members joining us in chat as well. So hello, everyone. Hello, Neil, Danny, and Takov, and Yannick, and Monica. Thank you all for stopping by. So, George, I suppose, first of all, we should start with some introductions for people that haven't already met you. So, who are you and what do you do, George?
So my name is Jorge Castro. I'm a community manager at Stacklet, which works on the Cloud Custodian project. It's an open source project on GitHub that you can go check out. It does cloudy things, which is how I ended up here. And in the past, a long time ago, I worked at Canonical and Ubuntu for a long time, like 10 years. But pre-Martin, I worked together with Jono Bacon and Daniel Holbach and bunch of those folks.
Yeah, I think our time together at Canonical overlapped by literally days.
Yeah, I was like, good luck. But then in between, I went to a Kubernetes startup named Heptio, and that's where I kind of learned all of this cloud native stuff.
Right. That
I'm going to talk about today. And so I went through what they call the cloud native journey, where you're like, oh, servers are totally different than how I thought they were, and that kind of stuff. And then we got bought out by VMware, so I was working there, learning all about infrastructure and all those kinds of things. And then eventually, I came to Stacklet, but I've always had my Linux desktop, and like many of you, so I use Linux desktops like as my work, and that's just how I roll. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of interest now because Steam Deck's coming out, and I got my Q1. I'm not getting the December one, but I'm pretty close,
Yeah.
And people are starting to talk about Linux and all these kinds of stuff. And there's some ideas from the cloud native world that I've started to apply to my developer workflow. Right. And as I've been learning that stuff, it's also like, if you could solve things for developers, because we're picky, man, we're so picky, right? The use case, I think, for like gamers, regular people and things like that just kind of automatically solve themselves when we make more reliable systems. So I'm really happy to see like distribution people listening in on the stream, because I'm ready to pitch that this is the way to do it. Not now, but soon.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get into that. We'll get into that in just a moment. I've seen some feedback to say that maybe your audio is a little cool, so you can probably give it a little bump. There we go.
Someone's going to regret saying that.
Yeah, well, we can moderate the volume as we go. I know you've got all the gear to do that. And also, hello, Popey, first-time commenter in the SlimDevOps chat. Hello, welcome. So, it's all Martin's fault, Neil says. No, it's not. I might have helped a little bit, but not very much. So, what is it that you've made exactly? Or not exactly.
Right.
What problem are you looking to solve, and what have you created to solve it?
Yes. So, the concepts and stuff that I'm going to talk about today have been around a while, like Fedora Silver Blue, Atomic. You might have heard of those terms. Sorry, I got to look in here. You might have heard of those terms before. And I've always kind of used these systems. OpenSUSE Micro OS is very similar to this. And I've always used these systems. But there was always kind of like a gotcha. And there's still some gotchas, and we're going to go over those. And, back in the early days, it was kind of like, oh, I made changes in Etsy. But then I didn't reboot, so I made more changes. And then when I did reboot, I lost them, like stuff like that. It was just kind of, still being baked. And like you could use Silver Blue, but then GNOME software got a little bit confused and things like that. And now with Fedora 35, they've tightened up a lot of things that I feel almost get us to the point now where you can start telling people that use normal Linux distributions to consider this kind of workflow.
Right.
and not totally like, lose the reason that they want to use Linux in the first place, right? We want people to be more efficient, and you're going to have to give up some stuff. Let me be straightforward with you. However, you gain a lot of things. And I think as these systems develop, those kind of jagged edges will be filed down, as we do that.
So
I'm going to show you the state of where it stands now,
okay.
And then maybe throw out the idea. I want people to have discussions about this. I want people to like argue on the internet. Don't argue like Linux users, argue like cloud users. Use like, reason.
Yeah.
And I want
some critical thinking.
Right. And I want you to sit there and say, you know what? I tried this and there were real issues there, because most of the issues that we're talking about aren't fixable unless you kind of change your mind. So I'm going to ask for everyone to like open your mind, pretend for a minute that what a Linux desktop is just gets a reset. Okay.
Yeah.
And then that will put us in the right mindset.
So I have some questions
Sure.
off the back of what you said, but I'm going to save those because I think it's probably good if we start to introduce the concept that you've come up with, and that will give us some time to have a chat and also feed off thoughts and comments from the people that are watching this live. And welcome to all of you. I see Andy Hazen has stopped by, and Big Pod as well, and Yannick. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for coming.
So, should I switch over to your system? Yeah? Okay, then.
Do it. All right.
So, what have we got?
I've installed Fedora 34 Silver Blue, and it's 34 on purpose. I know 35 came out yesterday.
Can I just say the irony of two ex-Canonical employees bigging up Fedora is not lost on me.
Yes. This is the last time I used Fedora was Fedora Core 2.
Snap. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the last time I used it.
But I always check on it and stuff. Like, you fire this stuff up because they got some good stuff going on here.
Yeah.
But like I said, it was never something I would really consider. And they had this. I'm going to go through their first user thing. And I know normal Fedora exists. However, I told myself if I'm going to change distros, I've used the same. I've used Ubuntu as my daily driver for work. Right, I've played with distros. I've got a clear Linux box. I've got an OpenSUSE box, that kind of stuff. But my day-to-day, everyday driver has been the Ubuntu LTS. Right. So I told myself if I'm going to move, I'm not going to move sideways. I'm gonna move to this new way of working, because that way I only have to change my behavior once instead of learning Fedora and then relearning again on top of Silver Blue. So GNOME gives you this nice tour and you can take it. That's all great. We're gonna skip all that. And then you get here, and then I have my first problem. I've used Ubuntu my whole life. So unless you're like following around with GNOME and stuff, like you need to know that there's a hot corner, and there's a thing here, and all that kind of good stuff. So I told myself that's all fine. However, I'm asking my brain to kind of change about how I do desktops. So I'm going to have some stuff familiarized with myself.
So that's an interesting point in itself.
A little bit easier. Yeah.
Because that kind of feeds into sort of the growing movement of sort of developer experience. And certainly something that we looked to address with Docker Slim, or rather Kyle did when he created Docker Slim, because he had a whole development environment and CI/CD platform built around Ubuntu as the base. And in order to slim down containers, he was, being told, but you should use Alpine. And so he created Docker Slim so he didn't have to relearn and encounter the friction of relearning some new stuff. He could keep what he already had and what he knew and just augment it. So this feels like familiar ground. Also, Andy Hazen is already talking about, OS tree bases. And,
he's already got it. He already gets it.
I know Andy maintains all of the FlatPak stuff in Ubuntu.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. You think we can get 1.12 and a backport SRU to 1204? Anyway, let's not get there. Let's cross that bridge when we get there. So I wanted to go to the new world, right? Okay. And I didn't want to get all preachy about like, you're gonna change your entire desktop and you're gonna like it, and we do this kind of Linux nerd thing, right? Where it's like, you're wrong and I'm gonna prove it to you. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna build it. I'm just gonna build a thing and it's gonna be awful, and you're gonna see like If you look in the bash, some of it is not great. People have been helping me out. I originally started out with Ansible, but then the module I needed didn't work in Silver Blue because I wanted to make this immutable thing and make it perfect. And I was like, you know what? Let me just start with this. And if the idea is good, someone's going to take it and run with it. So here's what I needed, right? I want these immutable properties of Silver Blue, but I have work, right? And for work in cloud, I need my Ubuntu LTS images, right? I might need another distro, a few things here or there, but I need my development environment. So those of you who have not heard of, you know what? Let me kick it off, and then I can preach on why I wanted to switch to this.
Okay, sure thing.
So you come here and you do your git clone. The hardest thing for me moving over to Fedora was they don't set Control-Alt-T to open a terminal. That's become like my biggest.
To quote a good friend, Control-Alt-T should be an ISO standard.
Yeah. So I cloned this, and then I added a bunch of scripts that we're going to go into, but we're going to kick this off here. And of course, PRs and stuff accepted. Like I said, if you want to do this kind of stuff, do it right, I'll be the first one to pay you money on Patreon. Okay, so I set a script to kind of do this, and we're going to run through it. You actually might want to show the first 0.0 script I'll this run, because this will take a while here. Is that readable?
Okay? So this
probably better to read the browser.
Yeah. And you could zoom. I can move over to my version if you like, and you can guide me through the README. There we go.
So go ahead and open the 0.0 batch file. And we're going to get through this because making it familiar to myself is, it's mostly cosmetic, right? What I really want to sell people here is this is going to be a move your workloads into Toolbox video, right?
Okay.
It just so happens that in order for me to do that, I need my Ubuntu desktop. So I just want to pause
here a second and just recap where we are, because there are some people that are kind of looking at this thinking, what the heck have I seen so far? So what you have done is you've installed Fedora 34
Silver Blue, right? Exactly.
And now you're running a script which is going to augment that to look. Well, actually, what's this first script do? It doesn't change how it looks and behaves.
The first script installs some apps.
Yeah.
And I set automatic updates on, automatic FlatPak updates on. I know that's controversial with some people, so you could just comment it out, or you'll be able to just run it through the GNOME software if you prefer to do it that way.
Right.
I'm going all in on this system though.
Right.
Because what this does, you just describe it for those of you saying like, why would you do this? What's an OS tree? So the basic main thing is the root parts of the root file system, not all of it. That's why I'm moving. We don't want to use the term immutable desktops. And if you look on the README, the top link, Colin Walters, one of the main proponents of OS tree, kind of goes into this long, nerdy, he's using words I never heard of before, that kind of thing, on why this is. And I felt like it's, after I kind of get through this, I feel like it'll be all of our jobs to figure out how to do this in a way that is more explainable to people. So this means lots of parts of the root file system are read-only. You cannot touch them. And when you do it like this, think about your Chromebook, right? You're on it, it's a Linux, right? And then when it says to update, you reboot into it and you get a new version of the operating system. Android is the same way. What this does is it allows upgrades to be very much more reliable than you typing apt-get this upgrade, but I had added a PPA 6 months ago and forgot about it.
Right.
Now I'm in trouble, Right. And most traditional Linux desktops are this way, right? And what do? We say, well, you shouldn't have used the PPA. And then the person will come back with, but I needed a newer version of Python, right? Now you and I are going to go, well, that's why containers were invented, right? So a lot of people who are using traditional Linux desktops don't think this way. And I want to make the argument on why you should. Okay. So if you cut back to me, the first step is actually already done.
Okay.
It's better if I just show you here. All right.
Sure thing. So
I'm going to remove the Firefox from distro. and I'm just going to use the FlatPak instead for a few reasons. Now, you don't have to do this. I want to use the FlatPak from Mozilla, and the FlatPak also has the availability of an FFmpeg package that makes all the multimedia and stuff work, and it's beautiful, and I don't have to deal with anything, and that's fine.
Right.
In order to replicate the Ubuntu experience, we're going to have to install some extensions. Now, I could have done this two ways: grab them via the upstream or grab them via distro. I chose distro because that will lock it to the version of GNOME that is in the distro, because as you know, or if you don't know, sometimes the extensions and the version of GNOME don't match, right? So like you're waiting for the extension ecosystem to catch up when there's a version.
You kind of have to have those extensions move in lockstep with a compatible version of the GNOME shell.
Right. So at first I was like, oh, I'll script up a way to just wget from extensions.gnome.org. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. There's enough of them in distro for me to just grab that, right? And then I added a few, like GS Connect, having your phone integrate with your desktop. That just has to be there. So I'm making a call on that one. Anyway, you can modify this as much as you want. Now, what we are doing here is calling overlaying packages into the OS. We do not want to do this. We want to do as little about this as possible. So I've basically picked out the bare minimum I need, and then I'm going to reboot the machine.
So that stage where you've removed Firefox, installed the FlatPak of Firefox, and added a few libraries is changing the overlay of the base operating system.
Yes.
And you're trying to minimize that because you're trying to keep this thing as... Sorry?
Small. You want to keep it small.
Right.
Yep. You want to do just like how you do your Docker containers at work. You want to keep them small. You want to make them reproducible, even though this is just a bash script. Like, you know, I would want this in real, like, you know, if we were doing this for corporate desktops, this would be an Ansible thing, living in Git with unit tests, all that business, right?
Right.
So that's what we need. Now we came back and I've installed a bunch of stuff, but I haven't enabled any of it. So I set this up initially as by hand, and then only afterwards I realized I should have scripted. That's so work.
I think this is where I got a message from you over the weekend.
You did. So here's what I figured. I tried this by hand. I was like, so dconf sits in the GNOME desktop, and somebody helped correct me on it. It's like the etcd of gconf, or of the desktop. I mean, right? It's like a key value store.
Yeah.
And there's a command that lets you watch it. There's a command that lets you dump the entire thing. So I went onto my Ubuntu machine and then I dumped all the keys, and then I ran them on Fedora, and it mostly worked. There were some things I had to change, and if you open the file and look in there, you see I'm not doing every key. Right.
So Andy Hazen makes a good point. He says that overlaying of packages is one of the escape hatches that the Ubuntu Core root is currently missing. And while we're in this transition to containerized apps, it's a useful feature to have.
Yeah. Now, Ubuntu Core Desktop doesn't exist, right? I wouldn't have needed to do this if that existed, right? Had a snap called Classic, where you typed Classic and it just gave you regular Ubuntu, like in a terminal and stuff that I'm going to show you. For some reason, that didn't get finished, which is a shame.
I think that was a Skunkworks project from who we know as Ogra.
Like, Ollie, hurry, finish it.
Yeah.
Things like that. Yeah. So what we want to do, so what I did is I did that. Now, we have made distributions before. So it was important to me that this not be a distribution, right? Normally, I love that I don't work at a distro anymore, so I can just say stuff like this. Normally, people say, I don't like this browser, and they'll make an entirely new distro. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, don't do that, right? And then, like, it's a year later, there's security update, and that now we have all these like distros or whatever. So I didn't want to do that. That was absolutely not a thing, right? So what I wanted to do is set stuff that existed already, and try my best not to mangle the OS. But when I do, it's for a good reason, right? Like I have to do some overlays, and you'll see why I made those decisions here in a minute, hopefully. So I made a script that turns a Fedora, and you can run this on any OS. This is only partially finished. It could be so much better. So if you know deconf and all that stuff, I was like asking Martin, I was like, Martin, what about this key? And you're like, dude, what are you working on? So let's get that done here. And sometimes it runs and it crashes the desktop. Sometimes it runs perfectly, but you just rerun it again. It's okay. So I moved the panel to the left. And the initial versions of this, I made opinions about default apps and things like that. I decided it's a better argument when I just leave it default so you can see what it looks like. So there's your rhythm box. There's your Nautilus works exactly how it does and stuff like that. Now it still looks like Fedora, right? Like the theme is still here and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to do the theme because, as we all know, that's always changing in GNOME, and like I didn't want to deal with any of that. So I was like, you know what? This isn't Ubuntu, right? So like I don't need to bring the theme. And then Laney's like, I need the theme. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. So that's what I'm working on.
So for those following along, Laney was also a long-time member of the Ubuntu desktop team who's recently moved to Grafana, I think.
Oh, good for him. Good for him. That's fantastic. Yeah, so it spits out stuff, right? Like I made all the scripts noisy so like you can just see what's happening there. And I definitely encourage you to open them before you try to figure out what's happening, because that's always good. And then you can, PRs are always welcome, by the way. So so I moved everything, and like I left the help on there, even though that's the first thing I always remove. Like I just wanted to give people a familiarity, right? We moved the clock back to the right. And you can't see them now, but I turned app indicators back on because for a lot of apps, I need that for like Slack. And like the first time I moved to this workflow, I launched Steam and I thought my Steam was crashing because I closed it, but it wasn't crashing. It was just hidden because it was in the overlay, the GNOME overlay, because that's where the panel is. Like it doesn't sit on your desktop. So I was like, this will be fine for now. Right?
So I'm seeing an interesting conversation here. So Andy Hazen is saying, I guess you can't install gschema overrides instead of setting those deconf keys as the file system is read-only, which was the conclusion I came to speaking to you at the weekend, which is why we started doing all this deconf nonsense. But I've noticed Neil says you can add them into /etc. So Neil, could you just elaborate on that? Because this wasn't something that George and I were aware of when we were discussing this, and maybe there's an easier option open to us.
If someone who knows GNOME knows the best way to do this, I will 100% do it, because I still haven't been figured out how to set Control-Alt-T either. And then I found you've been there, right? You're like in the Ask Ubuntu question. You're like, man, no one's edited this in like a long time, and you're just like, am I? And then you just find but I got it to work well enough, I think. There's a few things you're going to have to set by hand and things like that. So I've set that. And then the last one I have, I don't need to reboot here, is workarounds.sh. So here I'm doing some unholy stuff. That's why it's called workarounds, but we're like getting a modified version of the Ubuntu font to like install it and other stuff. I added some apps that I think people like there's this cool app called Font Downloader where you can just come in here, find your favorite font. They have like everything, and you just click install if you don't want to like figure out where .local blah 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 is. But I also just did some workarounds here. Now, very first version of this, I had vscode as a FlatPak. However, it is containerized. And for DevOps people, you've got to have your editor. And for a lot of people, VS Code, like if VS Code didn't work, this argument will fall apart immediately.
Right.
So I'm compromising by overlaying that. The other option,
I think you're touching on an interesting point there, right? So it's important to point out that what you're doing here at the moment, you're just creating a skin on top of Fedora Silver Blue to look and operate more like Ubuntu, which is the desktop experience that you're most familiar with. But in addition to that, extra packages are going to be installed, one of which is Visual Studio Code. I think we'll look at maybe more of those. And this is a key point. You are trying to find a way to deliver a developer experience which doesn't break, but developer experiences, IDEs in particular, usually need sort of unfettered access to the operating system.
Exactly. So this is why the VS Code snap on Ubuntu is classic, right?
Right.
The pass it to classic. And you might have heard this before, right? It's the common troll. FlatPak sucks. I installed Visual Studio Code. I opened the terminal and it couldn't find my compiler or whatever, right?
Right.
So we are making a compromise here and saying, yes, there is an overlay here that's going to happen. And as we go into code, now if you go into the FlatPak GitHub issues for code, you will start to run into, and we're going to reboot again. I could combine this into one step, but I chose not to until I figure out more stuff because I only want one reboot, right? But what was I saying?
About bugs in the VS Code FlatPak.
Right. So if you look in the FlatPak, there are people who are like modifying their VS Code profiles to do like a FlatPak end spawn and all this stuff. And I started to look into that, and it involved like mangling your dot files for each user. And I was like, this is an area that is going to need to be improved. So for now, we're going to compromise and we're just going to overlay it. When I first started using Silver Blue, I was like, oh, okay. And I just started overlaying packages. Well, every time you do that, you got to reboot to install it. And there's a method now called apply live that you can do that. But if you do it like that, you're basically just using it not how it was intended, right? At that point, if you just want to install a bunch of stuff as root, just use a normal distro.
Exactly.
Right? So anytime we overlay is going to be like a we're gonna think before we overlay stuff, right? But then Laney was like, you have to have the theme. So I overlaid the theme. The Yaru theme is in Fedora, so I feel reasonably confident, even though we're overlaying it, that it's not going to be a problem. And if it ends up being a problem, we'll just remove it, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked closely with the Yaru team, and I know they follow the Adwaita development extremely closely. In fact, all new development that happens in Adwaita gets pulled in as automatic pull requests into the Yaru project.
Right. So, and that is basically it for the script.
Okay.
Now, if you use Fedora already and you're okay with you're not as old as me or whatever, and you're perfectly fine redoing your entire workflow, then just you don't even need to run this script to get any of the stuff that I'm going to show you here next.
So this was basically creating you a comfortable pair of slippers. Everything that we've just done so far. Exactly. Now, the way this works now is my desktop, most of the parts that I care about, the fragile parts, are immutable, which means they're read-only. So stuff that you think should happen, that you can do, you cannot do. So where's let's go user lib. These people always tell you not to touch foo. Right. Exactly. This is also where a lot of people fall down, right? Because you're used to being able to just write wherever you want, right? So we're going to give that up. There are still places for us to put stuff. Right.
So cd etc system d system. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I forgot how to Unix. So I could do stuff here, right? I still have state. This is why people used to say immutable systems. It's only partially right, because you can't, sort of like containers, right? Like you still have user data, but then you have the system image, the actual Docker image that's spit out. Sorry about my dog, everyone. Beagles are the best. So what I'm doing is effectively separating those, right? And I am making a hard line in between my user data and the system, right? Because we want to keep our data, but I don't want to break my computer. So now, as a result of this, the entire system is more reliable. Upgrades are more reliable. Like, when you update a phone or whatever, you ever notice how all Linuxes that aren't desktop Linux always up, like you've never had a bad dist upgrade when you did an Android update, right? You've had bad updates, right? You might have had a bad update, but you never put the computer in a state that is like it will either work right away or it won't work and you revert, right? We don't get in this odd state, right? With Linux desktops, PPAs were great in 2008 or whenever they came out, right? But now adding that kind of stuff it just adds more entropy to a system, right? And when you talk to container nerds, They're always talking about this, right? We want to know where every single thing comes from, all the way down to like the Git thing. And then we want computers to build stuff and do stuff. And then we want an artifact that gets deployed onto a cluster somewhere, and it's the exact same binary, right? And we can do it over and over again, right?
And this is a key point here, because
yes,
this is where we pivot from talking about Linux desktop preferences and nerdery, and we start to dip into learning from the cloud native world and how containers have been deployed into production for years now, and leveraging all of the technology that makes that happen in order to produce a predictable outcome for our desktop workstations.
Exactly. So once you figure that out, you start to realize that it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to give up some stuff. You're going to give up some stuff. Like, you know, it's not going to be perfect. However, what you do gain in return is more reliable systems. And I'm going to do a live disk upgrade when we're done here.
Right.
And like, I know it will work. However, just to
that's brave.
However, just to manage expectations, remember, this adds a layer of hardening and like immutability. If your distro gives you a bad kernel, you're going to get a bad kernel.
Right.
You know what I mean? The difference is now rolling back and everything is just built in. You know, I can take a snapshot whenever I want. I can reset, like you almost get like a built-in, you know how Chromebooks have power wash mode?
Right.
Right. We could never do a power wash mode on traditional Ubuntu, because how would you do that? You'd have to reinstall.
Yeah.
Right. Power wash mode, but keep your data. You know, now we're cooking. Now this is a fundamentally different thing that you get. And I think people get bent around the axle, right? They're like, well, I installed a FlatPak and the theme didn't work. This whole thing is stupid, right? Like, you need to not think about it that way. You need to start to think about making the entire system more reliable. Right. And then someone's going to fix the themes. Like, don't get bent up around themes, or it doesn't have the desktop I want, or things like that. Stuff is going to happen at some point. Only if we start thinking about our systems this way and start explaining it to people in a way that's usable.
Right.
So right around now, as my friend Wayne says, I set up Ubuntu LTS for my aunt, and it's worked perfectly, and she's never had to do anything, right?
Right.
I'm not worried about her. I'm worried about your 13-year-old cousin who read something about Linux and then got on the machine and then it's like totally broken. Right?
Indeed. So I think what you're suggesting is we're at a potential inflection point for desktop Linux.
Absolutely.
Like the technology to do this is mature enough that we can shift the paradigm of desktop Linux away from packages that have root and can spray files anywhere over the operating system to an immutable atomic future.
And I get people hate that. They're like, I've mounted my Samba share in / made up name for years. Right. Now I can't write to it. You know, this is off. Like, you're going to have to change that paradigm, right? Like, you're going to have to think about it in a different way. And that can be hard for people. And I totally understand that it will be hard. However, all the stuff I'm going to show you here, you can use on your normal distro, right? And then you could just start to think about the problem. So as these things get sorted out, you know, you'll have people used to log in as root in X, right? Like, you would type root and then you would go in. And then as soon as people started coming out with things like sudo and don't log in, people would lose their mind. They're like, you know, if you log in as root and you break your computer, it's your own fault for not reading the document, you know. But hey, I like seatbelts. You know what I mean? Like, so we make a compliance tool, right? Like, if I told you, hey, everyone at work, stop making unencrypted S3 buckets, within 15 minutes, someone's going to accidentally make one, right? So we make a tool that doesn't let you make unencrypted S3 buckets and a bunch of other stuff, and it applies policy. They're guardrails. We want those things. In the past, you used to be able to hit Control-Alt-Backspace, and it would kill your graphical desktop. Right. And now we look back now, we're like, that is the crate. Why would you do that? Right. But back then, same arguments. Well, it's never worked. That, you know, they're taking away my freedom. You know, it's never worked that way. If someone is too stupid to hit Control-Alt-Backspace, then, you know, go buy a Mac, idiot. Like we had all these ways of like, like we have our set ways. This is how the Linux desktop is. And if people don't believe in this Debian distro kind of boil the ocean mentality, then you're doing it wrong, right? And then Chromebooks came out and said, you know what? We don't care how Linux distros are built. And in the entire episode that we've been doing so far, I bet you more Chromebooks have been sold than any Linux distro has been downloaded in the past few minutes. Right? We know Linux as an operating system is capable of making these reliable systems. All we got to do is get there.
Yeah.
And people are figuring it out, and we want to help them. And that's why I'm making this. That's why I'm doing this, right?
Yeah.
So if you have Fedora, at this point, you would type toolbox create. Right? And it's going to ask you to grab some container. I totally trust them. It's the same domain that makes my distro, sure. And they're going to do that. And now I enter with toolbox enter. Now, what they did here was very clever. Whoever came up with this idea, kudos to you. I am in a Fedora install, but if I do etc/os release, and then I open up a new terminal. Oh, it's a keyboard shortcut. Is it Control-N? Or Shift-N? Yeah, there we go. There we go. And I get out of the host here. Oh no. Let me get out. And then I do a cat etc/os release. This one says Silver Blue, but the container just says normal Fedora container image.
Right.
So what happens is when you go, if I'm not in the container and I type DNF, it doesn't know what DNF is because it's Silver Blue, because we're not using normal package manager. Right. But if we go into the toolbox and we type DNF, you get that. Right. So what they did.
So you have, just so people can follow what's happened here. Sure. You have installed a Fedora container image inside your Immutable operating system.
Mostly.
And this container image is a traditional Fedora image. So you can tread all over its file system and do whatever you like.
Look, it even does the same thing. It gives me this, and now I'm going to install Firefox inside of this container, because you're not going to believe this part. So what they did, I think the clever part here is they also transparently mounted your home directory, which in Silver Blue is like /var/home/George, but that's not important right now. That's important, but not for right now. So this allows me to kind of use my normal Linux-y stuff. And look, normal DNF. This allows to do my normal Linux stuff, right? But my host is this reliable stuff. Because usually people say, well, what about all the things I need to do? I need to install third-party repos. I need these tools that aren't available. Like, I don't want to reboot every time I install an app and whatnot,
I want to test my own app in an environment.
Right, exactly. So if Toolbox didn't exist, this would be hard, right? But Toolbox does exist, and you can run Toolbox on normal Fedora as well. So if you're like, I kind of dig these ideas, but I'm not ready to go full on, you could just install it on your normal OS. And if you're on Ubuntu, you could use LexC to kind of do this as well. Right. So this is going to go do stuff. And then this is crazy. Watch this. At Firefox, and there's Firefox, except however, this is my Firefox. Is this my Firefox? Yes. Hold on. This doesn't work.
Oh, because you already have one running, so it'll spawn.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Let's do it with the Ubuntu container, because that's more. So, in other words, I can install graphical applications in there as well. So if there's that old Pickle TK app or something that you need from Debian or Ubuntu Universe or something like that, you can have that. So it gives us kind of an escape hatch, if you're like, I need to install this thing. Now,
so Andy Hazen comments that this is what he's doing with VS Code remote containers. He says, I have a container per customer project that has different custom Qt versions and other random libraries in it. So it's isolated and from the host, but I can share my X11 or Wayland sockets to run the apps inside it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to look here, and that dot is missing, so we know we're not in the toolbox. Now, I'm going to cheat, and this gentleman here, Jay Menius or whatever. So in Toolbox, there are people doing pull requests to add more distros and things like that. And I got an Arch one running yesterday, right?
Right.
And I was able to just open a terminal, and I'm in Arch, and I Pacman installed an app, and I ran it graphically and all that stuff.
I think what you're telling me is you run Arch Linux, by the way.
Yes, because you're going to have that so you can flex on other people. Because, if you're only running this and you don't have Arch, they're going to you got to get up to what's going on. So now we hit Toolbox, enter Ubuntu. So when this didn't exist,
right,
which was awesome, because now, and there's this error, I don't know what this means, but like I said, there's some rough edges or whatever. Right now, apt get install SL. Sorry, mixing up my app commands. I've been learning DNF also, so now I'm all sorts of jacked up. Okay,
right. So what I can also see is there are people here. So Big Pod says that he has an open VS Code server per project. So there are some of you here that are already sort of halfway to where you're suggesting things are going, George, in that they're already isolating all of their environments to create these messy places to get stuff done without tainting the host operating system.
Right. So another reason I did this, I was on the Hacker News thread for 21.10's release, right? And this guy was like, I hate Ubuntu, I didn't upgrade it, and yet another broken upgrade or whatever, right? And then we find out that he's added a PPA that replaces System Python, right? And right away, we all know where this is going. Of course, it's going to break. And then the distro developer responded back with like, "Hey, we don't support that, right?" And then they just got mad at each other because like this person or whatever, and they're not the villain here, right? Like I'm not, right? They needed that version of Python for work, so they went on the internet and it said to add upgrade Ubuntu Python, add this repo or whatever, Dead Snake Eyes or something. I think we even have that in our documentation to do that, right? And then of course upgrades didn't work. The distro developers, like, well, no one would ever support that. I don't think any distro would support that, right? Because usually I'm willing to bet the distro developers is already using in this container workflow, right? Like they already know. I isolate per customer, whatever, all that stuff people are saying. Like they're already in that world. You know what I'm saying? So my thought is, well, if the file system was immutable, you wouldn't be able to add that PPA. That guy would be upset, first of all. Like he would be like, this whole new, where's the systemd haters club at? I'm gonna start my own. Like you totally get it, right? But if we help our distribution maintainers by shifting right into the containers and making all that custom Unix stuff, no one's taking away your freedom. You can do all the things that you want. We're just going to do it in a container so that when something blows up, we can throw it away. So in cloud, you can easily fork containers. You could say, you know what, we're going to try this thing. Martin, I'm having an issue here. Can you Docker pull this thing? And you'll get the exact thing, right? Like, and that's what containers are really good at, right? Oh, here's the issue. And then you fix it in version control. And we're not, pasting around PPAs or my personal favorite, add a Debian source list to your and you just end up with this just mangled hot mess, right? So part of it is just removing that world entirely, right? But we need our newer versions of Python. We use Ubuntu for all of our stuff, right? So I need to have Ubuntu 22.04. I can't just test on my stuff in Fedora because that's a different. We all have that person in our group of friends who runs a different distro from everyone else at work, and they always get the different bugs. You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't it be neat if we just had the consistent development environment across all of our people, but I could still run a different distro if I want, right? But I still have, and this is Ubuntu 20.04. It's modified, right? So it's not exactly 20.04, but for our purposes, it's good, right? So I can. I am going to pip install something. Oh, and I don't. What's the package for pip? Is it
Python 3-pip, I think.
Yeah. Pip. Now, if you look here, I am doing the exact same stuff I would have to do if I was on an Ubuntu machine.
Right.
Right. On the outside, Toolbox is a convenience wrapper for a tool called Podman, which is very similar to Docker. I don't want to go into that because there's a lot of information on there and it's more technical and more correct than anything I'm going to say. But you should definitely research those technologies because that's what's making all of this happen. So now what I've done is as I went through all the PRs in the Toolbox project, and I started to grab some of the distros and building them on my own. And I realized that I could keep a reliable host, but have every distro I want's user space here for work.
Right.
So when my boss says, hey, we should make sure that we build on CentOS 9 or 8, whatever version is coming on, I can make a toolbox on that and run these commands, right? Sure, I could fire up a VM or go into Amazon Cloud and fire up a remote desktop and stuff. But the nice thing about containers, they're fast. You can fork them. You can share your Docker files, all that kind of good stuff. So now
there's a couple of comments here. So first is Big Pod asks, does Fedora Toolbox use OCI compliant containers?
That is a fantastic question. Mostly, yes. It has to modify a few things, which is why I just can't pull an official Ubuntu cloud image and just have it run. If you go to Toolbox's, actually, why don't we show that? Show github.com/containers/toolbox.
Okay.
You can tell I've been reading it a lot because I memorized the URL.
Oh, excuse me. Oops. Is it -toolbox? Containers -toolbox?
/toolbox. Whoever snagged the containers namespace on GitHub, good for you. Yeah, if you scroll down.
Yep.
Keep going. All the way down. They actually list, keep going, you're almost there. Right there. They list all the stuff that you have to have. Now, not all cloud images have this, which is why people have been kind of figuring it out.
Okay.
So you need to do this kind of stuff, which is, at first I was like, oh, I could just Podman run an Ubuntu container and go into it. But then you don't get the nice stuff. So yeah, you do have to have modifications, which is why you can't do that.
Right.
This is evolving technology, so eventually over time wouldn't it be great? Now, think if you're anything like me, I started to think crazy ideas, and I actually asked on this on Twitter. I was like, hey, wait a minute, if it's just an OCI image, we could just use any of the tools that we use for OCI images, right? So we're pulling stuff from registry. You just saw me pull something from a registry all day. What's one more? It's just our desktop user space. And then now it's sitting in a registry, which is in every region. It's globally replicated. You know that fancy scanning tool that runs through all your Docker
SNCC
images and sees if you have, there's a bunch of sees if you have a vulnerability and stuff. Right now your desktop container is living in there. And I actually tweeted this, and then someone's like, we could do that, but we're not really sure if we want to let just random metadata live, because there's certain things that a registry expects. So, but however, in my brain, I'm thinking, if people actually use this, why wouldn't you want your developer user space to live in a registry in Git alongside? And it's the same artifact that you deploy on your server. So as you're messing around on your desktop and you're hacking, hack, push to Git, your Docker images and all that stuff, the things that you're creating, your OCI images, are the same.
Right.
Like you're taking the idea that Docker kind of brought to the masses, that it was like it works, but it totally works on my machine, but it doesn't on everyone else. We are taking this even deeper so that for developers, it's literally in their face all the time because you have to. That's why I moved to Silver Blues, because it forces me to do it this way. If I would have just said, sure, and I'll just keep using Ubuntu, but then use containers, right? Over time, I would have reverted back to my...
This is an important point in itself, right? So just to peer behind the curtain for a moment.
Sure.
You're doing this in a virtual machine, a virtual machine of Silver Blue, but in actual fact, that virtual machine is running on a Silver Blue install on the Metal.
It is. Yes.
Right.
Yes. So yeah, all the stuff that's available in your Linux, you have it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And remember how I mentioned I tried this before, it didn't work. Well, all of our apps are coming through like things like FlatPak. We don't want to overlay, right? But back when I getting started, you didn't have Chrome, you didn't have OBS, you didn't have, and every single day, more and more people are adding more stuff in FlatPak, right?
Yeah.
FlatPak Steam still has a few limitations, but as of the last major version of the FlatPak release, it works wonderfully because I knew if Steam didn't work, like no one would listen to it.
Right. Yeah.
So I've gamed entire campaigns in Borderlands 3 on Rawhide because I really wanted to see what was coming. And it totally worked because that's containerized and Steam doesn't, it ships all the things that it needs. I don't have to
it's got its own
32-bit
runtime.
Libraries installed. I don't know. I don't want to deal with this,
No.
So now a lot of apps are available in FlatPak. And once Steam started to work and I got Chrome, and Chrome is in the beta, right? But Chrome, Edge, Brave are all in there. I need all the browsers.
Yeah.
Right? Mozilla's officially publishing the FlatPak, so that's good for me. And I could just follow in the GitHub org and see what people are doing. If you go in the bug reports, you're going to see issues, and they're going to be things like, why does my Visual Studio Code not find what my thing is? So
I think that this maps to something you want to talk about a bit later, but Yannick asked, they'd like this for Ubuntu Mate, and BigPod says yes. They'd be up for an immutable Ubuntu Mate. Now, for those of you that don't know, Ubuntu Mate is my passion project. It's an official Ubuntu flavor that uses a traditional desktop metaphor. Now, the problem is Ubuntu Mate doesn't fully support Wayland just yet. And for all of this stuff to work, you need to be able to use a Wayland display server to provide that security and isolation, which is why, as far as I understand it at the moment, there's only two desktop options with Silver Blue, which is GNOME and KDE.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, I'm not sure if there's a Wayland limitation because on my work host, I actually have to use X because I'm sharing a lot of apps and some of the.
I'm sure that's using X Wayland to sort of pass.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, never mind. But also, Silver Blue GNOME has been the only one that existed.
Right.
This for Fedora 35, someone made a KDE version which I'm running on a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I tried this the last time I did the stream. You could totally rebase and switch to that with an atomic thing.
Right.
That did not work the last time I tried it, but I was able to revert. I didn't lose data. I didn't come up with a Franken-Debian situation where I had half a KDE installed and half a GNOME installed.
Right.
And it was like this hot mess. In the future, I totally see, and this is what's great. This is really great for like derivatives. Because I could never learn other desktops because if I switch to it, it has to be a reinstall or a VM. And I didn't want to mess up my default. I don't want to mess it up, right? But if you can guarantee me, and this is, you can't do this today, right? But I have switched to KDE back and forth, right? But wouldn't it be great if you could switch to any desktop and then just not deal with packaging conflicts like whatsoever? Think about how much more robust alternative desktops would be, right? Like you could actually you're giving up things, but it unlocks so many other options. Right? Like if I could switch to what do you call your Mate desktop? I'm sorry, is that Cinnamon or is that the other one?
No, Mate's one, Cinnamon's another. Yeah.
If you can guarantee me that I can switch to Mate, play with it with all my data, and then switch back without breaking my computer, I am more liable to want to try it.
Right.
Now, there's really only KDE and Fedora, but like I said, it's like chicken and the egg. Chicken and the egg problem.
Yeah.
Endless OS. Like I said, I'm not treading new ground here. It's just now that the things are starting to really come together. Does an OS tree version of Debian. And if you download their OS, and it's great, right? Because I put it on a computer that I want to donate, and I know that it can't break, package wise or anything like that.
Right.
So there is OS tree on Debian does work. Like someone's done it, but no one has extended that out to everything else, right? Like, yeah, an OS tree version of Ubuntu Mate or something like that. I don't know how much work that is. But
I think it's all tractable stuff, and I think for some of the desktop
Right.
environments, it's switching over to the new display servers and what have you. So
Right.
at this point, you have used Silverblue to create your immutable host operating system, and now you have all of the distros at your fingertips, and you can create environments to work on a project that maybe years ago there was some microservice that was developed on CentOS 5, and for reasons it has to stay on CentOS 5. You can have an environment to work on that, run it, test it, and all the rest of it, do the development, and the day that becomes a non-requirement, you can just toss that container aside and move over to the next project. So you have all of the flexibility that Linux and Unix provide. It's just a slight shift in metaphor, because you're not standing up virtual Python environments in your host operating system. You're standing up containers of a foreign operating system inside and working there.
Now, before someone jumps to conclusion, there definitely is a place for virtual environment. I'm not saying, not do that and then make a separate container. You have the flexibility to do that. But remember, part of the reason I wanted to do this is you want to bring all your scripts and all your work stuff with you, right? And all your scripts are going to make those for you already. So there's do I really need that change? Maybe, but let me figure out the system first before I want to decide. Right.
Although the reason I bring up virtual environments is a lot of people haven't even made that step, let alone to containers as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you want to cut back to mine, there's one more thing I wanted to show. And the reason I overlaid VS Code is so the internal terminal here, I wanted this terminal to continue to be Ubuntu, so I could do my work stuff up here, but then have everything down here. And I do this by overlaying it. In the FlatPak, like if I pipe, I'm getting the pipes. What's the how do you get the version of Python? It's just -- version.
I think so.
Yeah. Right. So in the FlatPak version, if I type the Python version, it's the SDK of freedesktop.org, which is fun. So what they do is they have different runtimes in FlatPak that give people development environments, and it has Git and Python and all that stuff. So for like people who maybe aren't doing crazy stuff, like I'm a community manager, so I'm writing Markdown, so I don't need all this stuff. I can run it on FlatPak, and I'm just editing Markdown files anyway.
Yeah.
But for most developers, they have to have this. So they need to be able to access the stuff that's in the toolbox. In here. Right. Now, as I went digging through the bugs, Visual Studio Code as an application isn't really set up for this, right? Like it's, that's the reason. Same with the Snap, it's classic mode. It's expecting to look in the system and find stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And this is a source of friction for a lot of people. Right. But I can imagine in the future, right? Like imagine a Visual Studio Code that maybe has a plugin for toolboxes and, your stuff, and you're clicking things and you're doing all the stuff that you're doing now, but without needing to give Visual Studio Code a space on the disk. And we've shrunk down the operating system and we moved that complexity into the containers. Right. Yep. So as you watch your developers, they're doing their Docker Compose up and blah, 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 blah. You can't do that in the toolbox. You have to do that on the host, right? And then you're going to find that Docker isn't there. It's Podman, which can be a drop-in replacement, but not. So I stubbed out in the script in case you need real Docker or whatever, and you want to overlay it, you can do that. But there's a lot. See how I'm just bringing up these kind of little limitations and irritations? Yep. There are all sorts of those. Right. And that's part of the reason I wanted to get this in front of people now, so they can get used to, should I be in a container? Like I want to build the Docker containers as part of the script so that what you need at work, right? I need build essential. I'm going to need that pip. I'm going to need all these little things, and I can have that as a Docker file.
Right.
I'll shove those into CI and along with all my other stuff. And now on my developers, user space is now being tested and QA'd and all that kind of stuff. Right. So,
but you also have instrumented containers for iterative local development as well, rather than tight minimal containers for production.
You can make those as fat as you want, and you can fork them, and you can say, you know what, let me, instead of, hey, boss wants me to make sure we work on the next version of LTS. I'm just using Ubuntu parlance, by the way. So like this applies to other distros, right?
Right.
I run on 2004. Do we run on 2204? Instead of firing up a VM, I just do a toolbox on 2204. And what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to try to run it and see what breaks. Right. And I'm already on the host, and I've transparently mounted my thing. So I've got the git clone of my project, so I could just run the test immediately, and it's transparent to me.
Yeah,
right. And then that gives me the velocity I need.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, that's because behind the scenes, you're automatically having your home directory mounted inside the containers that you're firing up. So you take your sort of comfortable place with you into all of these containers and environments. So you talked a little bit about, you're using Ubuntu parlance, and you've demonstrated this with Silver Blue. Are there other operating systems that you can do this kind of thing with?
Yeah. So doing the container and toolbox thing you can do on every distro. If you're on Ubuntu, use LXC. If you're on Fedora, obviously I think it ships with toolbox by default in traditional Fedora. I am not sure. I don't want to leave out OpenSUSE's micro OS desktop, because Rich has been talking about this for like a very long time. And it's totally built on a similar thing. It doesn't use OS tree. They use ButterFS snapshots and a tool called Transactional Update. You could set your desktop up to look like that. So I have a box like that. I just finished on Silver Blue first. So those are two. The reason I like those is they are reusing the existing infrastructure of their normal distros. So you get the QA, you get the same QA, right? It's tumbleweed for SUSE. It's open. It's for OpenSUSE. It's tumbleweeds. You're getting all that QA that they put into that, because it's not a new distro. We're just locking some stuff down, right?
Right.
And then Endless OS on the Debian side. I originally started with trying to take Endless OS and make it into a developer distro, but I quickly reached my technical limitations on that one. And then Fedora 35 just had a lot of the things. So in the older versions, the GNOME software would get confused about the RPM OS tree thing and stuff like that. So now in 35, they've really started to nail that UX, and that's great. And then let me just show you real quick, because I failed to do this the last time I was on the internet. Is the tool we're using is called RPM OS tree. Let me clear this up so it's not so confusing here. As you see here, this tells me the thing that I'm booted into, and then the other one. I can take as many snapshots on these as I want. I installed, but I did not do a apt-get upgrade. Basically, it installed, but it hasn't gotten the updates, and this is Fedora 34. So what do we think? There's going to be a bunch of them, right? So we could do that, but I'm going to cancel out. What I do want to show real quick, well, does anybody have any other questions? I want to show something running graphically in the Ubuntu Toolbox. As you saw, I apt-get installed gedit, and that brought in a bunch of X stuff and graphical things and whatnot. But what I do want to do is, now when I read Fedora, oops, I'm in the wrong app. If I do Fedora 35 release note Silver Blue, does it have the Silver Blue instructions? Sorry, Fedora. I should have bookmarked this. Here we go.
Right.
Instructions for the beta, but that's out, so we know that's going to be final. We know how that's going to work, right? So my container is still installing. I'm going to paste this in, and what I'm going to do is, in one command and in one operation, I'm going to do the equivalent of a do release upgrade from major version 34, which came out in the spring, to 35. Right. Now, the more things I overlay, the more risk I take.
Right.
Right. However, we haven't really overlaid that much stuff. Like we had a VS Code, and that's an external repository, and it's probably not going to stomp on our distro space.
Yeah, that's pretty self-contained, I think.
Yes,
as an Electron
exactly.
application, it's
Exactly.
kind of isolated by design.
Right. Now, look, we're doing a dist upgrade, and we're already at 20%. Actually, dude, this upgrade might go faster than apt-getting install gedit. Which I didn't do that on purpose, but that is good to know. So yeah, you take dist upgrades out of the equation. You don't put the user in a spot where they can't upgrade. I can also always do RPM OS tree reset, right? And that will bring me back to the thing. So I imagine a nice little GUI app that sits on your desktop. It says you've done a major thing. Click it, and it makes a snapshot for you, and then it shows up in your boot as like your recovery. And there's so many things that we could do that would make the experience more reliable for people, right? Like, yeah,
there's a couple of people commenting. So Neil says that RPM OS tree overlays are validated before committing the upgrade as well.
Good to know. The more I learn, the more safer I feel.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's just those blogs are a little. You got to be smart. I was reading them. I was like, I'm trying to understand, but like, I've known Colin a long time. I haven't seen him in a while. I was like, but I trust you.
Yeah. And then Big Pod goes on to say, at least with a system like this, Steam won't, implode and, as we saw recently, actually sort of evacuate your entire operating system off the hard disk.
Right. And then we never put our, and I mean all developers,
right?
Especially open. We don't put our distro developers in that situation, and the user don't end up in that situation. But in order to get to those more reliable systems, those of you that are listening, all of us need to figure out how to tell this story better. And that's why I'm doing this over and over again. I'm trying to get better at it, right? I want to do a talk about this like at scale or something, have a panel, talk about the real things, like stuff like fixing Visual Studio Code and FlatPak in a way that is usable for folks. There's still too many FlatPaks. I have too many loose permissions. Like we need to tighten all that stuff up, right? And we can't. And same with Ubuntu, right? There's too many snaps that are classic,
right?
And we need to start moving the attention to fixing that. And when our systems are more reliable, we can deliver those fixes quicker, faster, and more efficient to people.
So I think what you're advocating for there is people start to experiment with this kind of Linux desktop paradigm in order to start pressing on the sore spots and figure out how we fix and improve these things so that we can move forwards and in some ways catch up with where Google have taken the productization of Linux with Chrome OS and Android.
And if you look, this is gedit in Ubuntu running in the container, and I can open a file. Right now, this is a really awesome crutch, right? Because now, before when I was only running Silver Blue and I didn't have Toolbox, it was like, oh, I got to install a thing. And then over time, I layered so much stuff. I might as well be using
Yeah.
At that point, I was missing the point.
You've undermined this whole.
I've thrown away all the awesome benefits, And look, I'm not going to use gedit like this on an everyday basis, but it's good to know that it's there. And as more applications get added to FlatHub and whatnot, and if you want to use snaps, I got there's somebody else's script that got snaps working in Fedora as well on Silver Blue. I ran that for a while, but I ended up liking this better.
So Neil is asking, have you convinced me to switch to Silver Blue? Or is Martin going to make a Mate-ish Silver Blue? So neither of those things. I don't think I'll be switching to Silver Blue anytime. I certainly won't be stepping on Wolfgang Ulbricht's toes, who maintains Mate in the Fedora community. But I have been talking about NixOS as like a place to land, particularly for people like us who our commodity currency day to day is working with containers. And NixOS has a lot of the same properties that you're demonstrating here with Silver Blue.
Yes.
So
I should have mentioned that, actually. That was a glaring omission on my part, because someone should build this but give me the Nix packages on top so I can get my apps and they're all integrated.
Right.
I tried the Nix OS Home, right? But it very much is, I had to go deep. Like it was totally different. I felt, sometimes I want to say, I wish if you called Nix like a Debian, no one's made an Ubuntu for Nix yet.
Right.
And it's good stuff. Like I've run it, and if you look in their GitHub, there is so much work and testing and stuff happening in the Nix community. If someone were to bolt that on top of a system like this, you'd be onto something.
Yeah,
I think so. And look, I'm a Fedora 35.
So in the time it took to install gedit inside your Ubuntu container, you've actually pretty much completed a full distribution, what we would consider a distribution upgrade.
Right.
And well, that was effortless. And you've kept all of those modifications that you made earlier, so it still looks comfortable and familiar to you.
Yeah, I think it even kept the theme.
And the other thing you have, of course, is those containers that you've created.
Right. So
that are basically your workspaces.
Right. So I think I only have one if I do toolbox list. And there's a lot of commands and stuff here. I don't want anyone to think, oh, it's so easy. You know what I mean? Like you're going to be learning some things. So here it is, and I do toolbox entry.
And at this
point, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now someone's going to say, hey, wait, I can also install any normal Linux distro, not doing anything to it, and then do an upgrade, and of course it's going to work, right?
Right.
The difference here is that it enforces that discipline on you. Like we all do it, right? Like I bought this brand new Thelio, and it was like, man, this one's going to be perfect, and it's going to be whatever. And 3 weeks later, it's like I have a Franken Ubuntu, and I know I've worked with engineers like that who are like, remember, I know people who turn off Universe, so that they can keep that tight, upgrade loop. This just kind of gives me a hard fence,
Yeah.
But I can still get the stuff that I need.
And also using a solution like this, you're not placing any expectation on people to know that they shouldn't edit etc sources.list, because that's a package maintained file, and if they tread on it, then they're breaking the ability to upgrade cleanly. You just don't need to even have to worry about educating people about what they should. They
don't have to be a
Linux
system administrator, right? For work, you're going to be doing sources.list. You're going to be doing all that stuff, right? I need to do all that stuff for work. That's fine. Doesn't mean I want to do it on my desktop.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to do it on my Android phone. It's certainly not on my Chromebook. Why would I bring that toil? Here's the thing. I would love all Linux desktop people to say, to think about. There's a difference between doing things that enable you to do stuff and toil, and maintaining immutable systems is quickly reaching toil, if not already. I consider it all toil, right? Is toil. So like managing my sources.list on my workstation isn't it, I don't sit there and I'm being an administrator. Look how great I am, right? I don't want to do that, right? And I want to automate all that away because I have work to do. It's just in the containers, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sacrificing that, and I'm shifting it right. Over the next few years, it's already happening. Millions and millions of dollars will be spent on open source projects that are all infrastructure based on what they call shifting left, moving the testing, the QA, all that stuff earlier and earlier in the software production process. If we as end users shift right, all that good QA that it's happening, and it's going to, even if you're only a desktop user and you don't care about any of this cloud business, all those libraries and stuff, that's all gets used in your operating system, whether you like it or not, right? The more reliable and that stuff gets, we move our stuff to the containers, the entire system will be better, and it will be better. It's just hard. It's hard to realize this unless you've seen your first Kubernetes cluster running CoreOS, and the nodes are rebooting and they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff that a sysadmin you thought would give you a heart attack, but you end up with a more reliable system. That doesn't make sense. So I totally understand why people are scared.
Yeah. I I have said on some podcast or other, I don't remember which, that the container industry is $1 billion industry. It's where the significant investment is happening in sort of Linux being used to, well, literally change the world around us.
Right.
And you're sort of wading against the tide if you think that those paradigms don't apply to desktop Linux. It is inevitable if that is where all of the effort, energy, and investment is coming from around Linux, that desktop Linux is going to have to hop on board and capitalize on all of that in order to be carried forward into the future.
Yeah. So someone says experience for me indicates that people are more prone to cruftiness with container-based stuff, hence the whole industry to try to combat the increased entropy and laziness. I would agree. Yeah, some people definitely container wrong for sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
The difference here is I can't break the desktop.
Right.
I can't break the host. Where I think that the cruftiness is conflated with the host currently.
Yeah.
Right. For sure, someone's gonna, still add that PPA and it's gonna break their Python and they're gonna get the exact same thing. Right. But at least they can connect to the internet and their computer works. But yes, this is not, this isn't a panacea. It's an option,
Right. It's a peek into what the future could be, I think, really.
It's what it could be. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when we were talking earlier, you were saying, you're not treading new ground here, really. What's happening is the technology that makes all of this possible has become accessible to people who don't have to be sort of Linux system plumbers to understand how to do this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, look, even the screensaver even popped up. It totally locked my screen. So yeah, it's definitely not a panacea, right? Just like we've all been there, right? Where it's like, well, my boss told me we're using Kubernetes, right? And it becomes this nightmare deployment because they didn't know, they didn't do requirements, they didn't do anything, and then everyone's like, see, I told you containers are awful. Like, there will definitely be a lot of that, right? There will be someone who will run into an edge case and break something that we said shouldn't break, right? Like, you're still going to break stuff. It's just the likelihood is higher, right? And there's still way too many stuff out there. Hey, buddy, you want to say hi to the internet? There's still too many stuff out there. Like I was saying with my Thelio, right? It was an expensive computer, and I could read a top 10 cool things to do your Linux install. And I could break that computer in like one command. Not even the accidental, hey, someone's joking with me, run RMF, R star or whatever. But more like just basic. I wanted to try a to-do app,
Right.
And I ended up with that abandoned Java web update, Java PPA. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
That's
I could use that PPA into my container, but I can also use the OpenJDK published containers that they're very well tested.
Yes.
All right,
indeed.
buddy, that's enough. The internet has had enough of me.
Well, George,
the internet has had enough of me too. I
think you've sort of demonstrated the core concepts there, right? This is a potential change in how desktop Linux could be applicable. We've covered sort of developer experiences here, but I know that you are a keen Linux gamer as well, and you talked about Steam. So this goes beyond just developer experiences, and I've long said,
because developers are. Okay.
Yeah, developers are people too.
See, I'm gonna have to do those wireless earbuds. If you can make something usable for like developers, then like your gaming machine thing kind of fixes itself.
Indeed. So that's what we wanted to present today. I think we're going to do a follow-up on this for two reasons, right? One, we want to look at how your success goes when you run this for sort of a slightly longer period, but also something we were talking about is, well, let's make big, fat, developer-friendly containers and then hook those up with something like Docker Slim that we work on here so that we can minify those and take these developer-friendly, well-instrumented containers and turn them into production-ready containers that have additional security around them with regards to seccomp rules and AppArmor and minified and auditable and observable. So I think that's where we want to go next with this, to sort of like join the whole thing up, in sort of a full developer experience.
Yeah. Someone added, "This is not a silver bullet, but what is?" I agree. I think it's better than what we have. In my 3 months I've been using Linux desktop since 1999. This is the best, most reliable system I've had so far.
Yeah. So that's what we have. This conversation is going to continue. If you're not following here, please do. We'll be touching on stuff. I think next week I'll be joined by my colleague Peter, and we're looking at multi-container orchestration, I think, is what we've got coming up. Or is it multi-container? It's multi-container something. I forget where we're going, but we'll be doing one of our workshops on that next week. And by all means, the URL's above my head. Join our Discord if you've got questions on this topic. George, where can people find you if they want to find out more about all of this?
Twitter.com/CastroJO. I'd love to continue the conversation. There's definitely lots to talk about and lots of things to consider here. So thank you for listening.
Indeed. And if you are interested in desktop Linux, then I think, your attention is welcome over here on Ubuntu as sort of a proof of concept playground, but, more widely as well.
Play with it. Break it.
So thanks very much for joining me, George. That was a fascinating combination of the learnings from the sort of the cloud native world and how that could apply to desktop Linux for the future. So
awesome.
Thanks a lot. I enjoyed that, and I look forward to having you back on here in the future to discuss some of this and how it panned out.
It's wrong. Don't do it. Don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. It's fine. I'm in month 3, so like the hard part's over for me.
Right.
So
yeah.
We'll see where it goes.
And for everyone that joined us today, thank you very much for stopping by. I hope to see you next time. And for now, we'll put a bow on it and we'll wrap it up there. So thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Cheers.